Welcome to our session today on loss and bereavement. My name is Ellie Mortimer and I'm an educational psychologist with Westminster and Kensington and Chelsea. So the last few months may have felt like the most significant and unprecedented change in our lives in living memory. And that's a feeling that really has gripped the entire world. It's been quite fast-paced, it's been unpredictable, and for many people, the last few months has stirred up lots of difficult emotions. What's become really clear is that although we're in the same rough seas, we're in very different boats. Experiences of bereavement and loss, of caring for someone who's shielding, living with frontline NHS workers or carers, coping with additional stresses, homeschooling or job losses, worry and anxiety will have been shared and lived experiences for many. We may have experienced a bereavement ourselves or know people who have, and we're likely to have experienced different losses, whether that's a loss of our normal routine or the freedom to see family and friends and do what we want to. During our session today, we're going to spend some time thinking about the following areas. We'll think about typical responses to loss and bereavement, children's understanding of death. We'll think about looking after ourselves and also what we can do to look after children at school. And this will include some ideas for activities in the classroom. We're going to pause here and take a moment to reflect on the content of the session before we get started. We're obviously not all together, so we won't be able to share and reflect on our feelings in the same way that we would usually. We're going to be talking about a topic which may feel deeply personal or upsetting for many of you. Some of you may have lost loved ones recently, and some of you may have experienced losses in lots of different ways. Before we start, take a moment to think about who you will go to if you're feeling upset after this session. Perhaps agree to meet with someone in school or let someone at home know that you might want to talk or have some space. Have a think about that person now and try to make sure they're available after you've listened to this session. We're also going to have the opportunity for an online drop-in in a couple of weeks' time. But if you have any queries or questions in the meantime, you can email me at the email address on the screen. There are lots of different types of losses that we all experience, not just related to bereavement. Take a few moments now to think about these different types of losses and what they might be. Okay, so you might have thought of divorce, of death, separation, a parent or loved one going to prison, moving to a new house, changes in classes, a change in colleagues or teachers leaving school. You might have thought of the death of a pet, the loss of a favourite toy, a change of job, a change of friendship group, a miscarriage or stillbirth, or a long-term illness of someone that you love or you're close to. Barry and Matthew Carpenter, in a think piece on the recovery curriculum in the time of COVID, also refer to 5 losses that many people may have experienced during the pandemic. These are a loss of routine, structure, friendship, opportunity, and freedom. And it's important for us to remind ourselves that our usual support systems might have been removed over the last few months. We're not able to meet up and spend time with people in the way that we would usually. And this can make loss and bereavement even more challenging to manage. With this in mind, it's important for us to treat ourselves with compassion and hold on to the idea of a transition period, rather than rushing or putting unnecessary pressure on ourselves or each other to feel or get back to normal. And in thinking about our current context, Alain de Botton, who's a philosopher, on Elizabeth Day's How to Fail podcast, talks about embracing vulnerability. He says, we don't need to be braver than we are. It's completely normal to be in distress, and it would be strange if we were not distressed by this. It's a sign of sanity to go insane at points, and this is one of them. This is not a time for stoic forbearance or sentimental optimism. In her book, Death in the Classroom, Eleanor Gatcliffe writes, "Death and the awareness of death are two aspects of the human condition with which every culture must come to terms. Yet in many Western cultures, it's evaded, ignored and denied. It's almost as if death is just another disease to be conquered. Yet death is one thing in life that we can be sure of." We all experience death across our lifetimes in different ways. The way we respond can also be very different, and there's no right way to grieve. After the death of someone, a parent, a friend, or a family member, children and adults all experience a range of feelings. Some of these might be physical. We might experience pains in our body, a fast heartbeat, loss of appetite, tiredness, hyperactivity, poor concentration, sleep problems, restlessness. Young children, you might see a regression in terms of their toileting or their sleeping, or they might have difficulty leaving loved ones. And many of the things that we experience will be emotional. We might have feelings of shock or disbelief. We might feel irritable, upset, worried and anxious. We might feel fearful, angry, guilty. We might feel ashamed, sad, depressed, sensitive or despairing. And these are all normal emotions that we'd expect to feel after somebody's died. We might see children acting out or becoming withdrawn. Some children might express their feelings by joking around and laughing. Some children might seem to have no reaction, and then they might have a big outburst of emotion. They might seem fine one minute, and then suddenly upset the next, and then they might go back to seeming fine again. For some children, the response to grief may be delayed, and it will take time for their feelings to surface. Younger children are likely to express themselves through behaviour and play. The way in which we all experience a loss is likely to be affected by lots of different things. Our age, developmental stage, our previous experiences of loss, how close we were to the person who died, how they died, whether it was sudden or whether it was gradual. Maybe feelings of conflict within the relationship, the feelings of other people around us, our support network, and the other stresses happening in our lives at the same time. Historically, many people have talked about the stages of grief, but the way in which we understand it now is slightly different. Rather than thinking about stages which come to an end, we now think about grief as something we carry with us, but which our lives grow around as we begin to draw strength from our support networks and learn to live with grief. When a bereavement first happens, it can feel all-consuming. For many of us, a loss will be a defining moment in our lives, which will always be with us. As you can see from the picture, when a bereavement first happens, it can take over our lives. Over time, our lives grow around grief and we learn to cope with it in lots of different ways. Although it will always be there, it will somehow become smaller and more manageable. There's no specific time frame on this. Children and families grieve and are supported in lots of different ways. Children often learn about death and loss through what they see of it and its effects on the people closest to them. This may even include you as school staff. Children who are not told about death or not given the information they need to understand it are likely to make up stories in their head. These stories are likely to be more frightening or confusing than what really happened. When we speak to children about a death, it's important to try and correct misunderstanding and use clear, age-appropriate language. Talking to children about death can feel difficult. Often we might be worried about saying the wrong thing or upsetting children further. For some of us, this conversation might bring up our own feelings about a bereavement or death. What we do know is that we shouldn't let a sense of hopelessness or fear stop us from reaching out to children. Children need to have a death explained to them in a factual, honest, age-appropriate way and be given the opportunity to ask questions. It's much better to use the word died and explain what this means, for example, never seeing the person again, rather than using ambiguous language like gone to sleep or lost, which can feel confusing for children. Always check how much the child's understood. Children often need opportunities to talk about the person who's died and have their feelings acknowledged and normalised. Some children might ask lots of questions. How did they die? Were they in pain? What has happened to the person now? It's okay to say you don't know if you're not sure of the answers to these questions. Children will likely keep these to themselves and worry about them if not given the space to understand the situation a bit better. It can be helpful to steer clear of telling children they're being brave. This might indicate to them that they shouldn't be showing their feelings, when in fact it's really important for them to outwardly express them. As adults who know children well, we can support them by letting our genuine concern show, being available to listen to what they need in the moment, acknowledging what has happened and acknowledging their pain, and reassuring them that there's no right way to grieve. It's okay to let your own emotions show and for them to see other adults upset. We're all human. We're now going to spend some time thinking about how generally primary aged children at different ages understand death. We'll start by thinking about children between the ages of 2 and 5. At this age, children think death is reversible and that people who have died will come back. They might have magical thinking. Children at this age can be convinced that it was something that they said, did, or thought which led to a person's death. Or they can think that they can bring a person back by doing something or thinking in a certain way. Children at this age need to be reassured repeatedly that the death wasn't their fault. They need specific, concrete information because they might find it hard to fully grasp more abstract concepts like the fact that somebody is gone. For this reason, children might ask the same questions over and over again to try and make sense of their loss. And this can be quite hard for us as adults to keep going over the same information. This isn't a sign that your explanations aren't good enough. It's just the way that they process things. Having a limited vocabulary, children at this age will generally express themselves through play. Young children might revert to younger behaviour patterns, so you might see bedwetting or thumb sucking, and this is completely normal and will usually disappear over time. Between the ages of 6 and 9, children begin to develop an understanding of death as irreversible, and something that will happen to all living things, but they still might be confused about it. It's not uncommon for children to think of death as something spooky, like a zombie or a spirit that comes to get you. It's important that their specific worries are spoken about, that they share bad dreams and are told that what they're feeling is normal. Children at this age might display what you feel is an unhealthy curiosity with issues such as what their body looks like and what happens to the body after the person has been dead for some time. This curiosity is natural and they'll benefit from clear explanations. They may worry about how the person who has died will eat, breathe, and keep warm. It's important to give them information and tell them that once someone has died, their body doesn't feel anymore and they won't get hungry. Children at this stage may complain of a sore tummy, headaches, or just generally not feeling well. These are what we call somatic complaints, where unexpressed feelings and emotions can lead to physical symptoms or discomfort. Somatic complaints are normal, but it is important that routines are maintained while gently acknowledging when someone important dies. Children may have vivid dreams or nightmares, and things that were previously manageable become more worrying to them. Things like the dark or the news. Between the ages of 9 and 13, children are much more aware of the finality of death and the impact the death has on them. They're able to understand death as both concrete and abstract. Children might experience difficulties in their interactions with peers. The death of someone important can make them feel different. At the time, they really want to be the same as everyone else. Children at this age are beginning to think of the longer-term consequences of the loss of the relationship. They're aware of the loss they feel in the present, but also of the losses they will experience in the coming months and years when they encounter certain important milestones or occasions, and realise that they won't be able to share these with the person who's died. Children are beginning to move away from dependence on their family, and they start to form important relationships with other children. The death of someone important can easily destabilise them, leaving them feeling unsafe and more dependent on their family. Their ability to manage their feelings may be disrupted and lead to mood swings or more definite ups and downs in their feelings. Big emotional releases, like times of anger or distress, are not uncommon, but they can be scary for children at this stage. Children will benefit from your willingness to listen to them and your assurances that their feelings are normal. It's helpful to remind ourselves that any loss that we hear about at school can bring up our own feelings relating to current or past experiences. For this reason, sometimes it's important to think about who is going to be in the best position to support a child or group of children. If we've just had a loss ourselves, sometimes this can make it more difficult for us to support others, and it's okay to take a step back. Taking time to recognise this is really important. We need to remind ourselves to put on our own oxygen masks before helping others. That's because if we as staff, adults, professionals don't feel a sense of well-being, if we don't feel supported and looked after by those around us, whether that's in school or at home or in the community, it's really hard to support others like children. If we as staff don't feel a sense of safety, physical and emotional at school, it's hard to reassure parents and families. Children will feel safe when the adults around them, staff and parents also feel safe and secure. Our well-being is dependent on communities that foster our well-being and also on our personal well-being strategies. There are actions that you can take at school without formal psychological or counselling training to help provide emotional support for people who might have just been bereaved or suffered from a loss. These actions are about reducing distress, assisting with the current needs of colleagues, and making sure that colleagues are offered the help and support that they need to carry on with their job. These are just a snapshot of things that you can do when someone else is feeling overwhelmed or very distressed. You might start just by making them a cup of tea or coffee and sitting with them for a few minutes to listen with compassion and without judgment. It might be helpful to ask simple questions to find out what practical or emotional support they might need. Try not to hypothesize about the past or the future and try to stay present in the conversation. It's really important to say that you don't need to fix the problem. Sometimes just listening can feel like enough for people. This can be really similar for children as well. It's important that their worries are listened to and not dismissed. And it can be helpful to really remind ourselves that with children as well, we don't need to fix the problem. The death of someone is something that we can't fix. And often we can jump straight into problem-solving mode to try and make everything better. For children and for adults, sometimes you just need to listen. We're now going to think about how we take care of ourselves when we start to feel heavy. This might mean going for a walk, listening to music, watching a film, or making ourselves something nice to eat. We might do exercise, or we might do something that we find relaxing. When thinking about looking after our own well-being, it's sometimes helpful to think of ourselves as a container. We can imagine that stressful events are water which is being poured over into the container. We don't necessarily have control over the water that comes in, and if we don't have ways of coping or looking after ourselves, the water can quickly overflow and we might snap. Engaging in strategies which help us cope and support our well-being can prevent the container from overflowing. I think of it like a bucket with holes in. Each hole is a way that we look after ourselves to stop the container overflowing. As adults, we have a wider range of coping skills to choose from than are available to children and young people. We know that we can survive adversity, but young people often haven't learnt this yet through experience, and they don't know that they too have coping capacities. Take a moment now to think about or write down the things that stop your container from overflowing. We know that schools can make a difference to children who've experienced bereavement and loss, and this difference can be significant and really important. Your relationships and connections with children are likely to be a huge protective factor for them during difficult times. Jonathan Bisson, who's a professor of psychiatry at Cardiff University, alongside the NICE guidelines, tell us that practical help and empathy are more important than counselling in the first days following a catastrophic event. All the evidence is quite clear that one-to-one intervention at the early stage may not have great value. For most children who've experienced a loss or bereavement, we would usually advocate a period of watchful waiting in relation to their well-being. This is a term used in psychology and refers to the period of around 6 to 8 weeks after a loss, when we watch for changes in behaviour and handle them with patience and understanding. After this period, if we still have ongoing concerns about a child, we might signpost to professional agencies. We need to try to find ways for children to learn that although terrible things do happen in the world, people care about them and love them, people want to help them, and people want to keep them safe. When thinking about supporting a child with a loss or bereavement in the classroom, it can be helpful to keep in mind what we already know about child development, their understanding of death, and typical grief responses in children. After a tragedy, it can be really important to keep to a routine. This can be really comforting for children. It can be helpful to stay in touch with families so that you know what the child knows about the death and how it's been explained. You might also be curious about how the child's been at home. It's important to let them know about what you know about in relation to the death and to express your feelings of sadness about it too. Children might want opportunities to express their feelings about what's happened, either through drawing or playing or talking to a trusted adult. It's important to say that some children may not feel like talking, and that's okay. They might express themselves in lots of different ways. Some children might appreciate a space to go to within or outside the classroom when they feel they need to. Naming feelings and putting words to children's reactions can be helpful. So saying something like, "I can see you're feeling really angry today. Have I got that right?" Many children might find it hard to concentrate on their work, and so they'll need adapted expectations in relation to this for a while. School staff are really experienced and skilled at supporting children to feel calm, safe and secure. The only things that have changed are the potential causes of children feeling stressed or upset. All those skills and strategies that you already have will be useful when supporting a child who's experienced a bereavement. Many children may feel angry or restless in relation to the death of a loved one. Directing children's feelings to something positive can be helpful, like creating something, planting a tree, or starting an activism project. Keeping children in touch with concrete memories can be important. For example, making a memory box with pictures or objects which remind them of the person who died, or making a memory jar by writing down memories of a person on small pieces of paper and putting them inside. Both of these can be nice ways for children to feel like they're actively remembering and spending time thinking about the person who's died. For many children, their relationship with this person might continue to change as different memories are shared and as they get older. Some children might like the opportunity to relax through mindfulness, guided relaxation, or time to play or read. Others might like the chance to learn about grief in an age-appropriate way so that they can make sense of their experiences. You might want to mark special dates or anniversaries with children in specific ways at school. The websites on this page have some useful activities for the classroom. Our service also has lots of different resources that you can draw from. This includes the two that you can see here on this slide. The one on the left was a resource that was put together this summer, and the second one on the right was put together just after Grenfell in 2017. You can ask your school Senko for copies of these. There are also lots of helpful books that you can draw from and use with children in your classes. There are some really good reading lists available on the websites on this slide, so at Winston's Wish and also at Child Bereavement UK. These are just some of the books that are on that list. Muddles, Puddles and Sunshine is a workbook that children can work through and they can write and use drawings. And the others are books that you can read with children, all about death. And there are lots of different charities and organisations that can offer schools and family support. On this slide, there are just 4 which help support children and families when someone dies. So we've come to the end of our session today. I hope that you found it helpful, and I'm looking forward to having the opportunity to speak with some of you soon.